This is video number 2 in the Urban Worm Bag intro series. In the last video, we covered the assembly of the Urban Worm Bag, and in this video, we're going to talk about the startup, feeding, and maintenance of your own Urban Worm Bag. And for those of you who don't have one, firstly, shame on you. But secondly, most of what I talk about in this video is great for your existing worm bin. So here we go. Startup is easy. You'll want to start with a 6 to 8 inch layer of carbon-rich bedding material like shredded cardboard, paper, decomposed leaves, peat moss, or Coco Coir. Starting with existing vermicompost is a great idea, but you're going to want some other carbon-rich material with it. If you start our Urban Worm Bag with the Urban Worm Coco Coir, a 2-pack of our 1.4 pound blocks would be great, but it's even better to start with a diverse mix of all the above. The bedding should be thoroughly moist, but not sopping wet. Worms breathe through their skin and they need water to transfer oxygen, so moisture's key. This initial bedding layer will eventually provide a good habitat for your worms, but we need to dirty it up a bit with microbes. One great way to do this is to add some decomposed leaves, also called leaf mold. Leaf mold will be rich in microbes and help jumpstart the life in your bin. But I would also add a small amount of food waste, maybe just a cup of something like fruit waste and coffee grounds. This will provide extra food for the microbes. Now, in a perfect world, I want you to let your new Urban Worm Bag sit for a week or two. You'll notice that we haven't even added worms yet. I know. What we're trying to do is develop the bacteria in your bedding. Paper, cardboard, coconut coir, and peat moss are great materials, but they hardly have any microbes starting to decompose them yet. And worms hate a sterile environment. So leaf mold and food waste will go a long way towards boosting your microbe population. Letting your Urban Worm Bag sit for a while will also let any excess moisture from your bedding drain out of the bottom. If you assemble the Urban Worm Bag with the bottom attached, you'll want to remove it to allow any water to drain out. So now that you've got your initial bedding layer inoculated with some food waste, let's go ahead and put in your worms. If you haven't ordered worms yet, I would recommend buying red wigglers, and I'd love for you to buy them from us. And these are more tolerant of a wide range of conditions, especially temperature, than other species. And no, you don't want to use garden variety earthworms in your worm bin. You want composting worms like red wigglers only. So before you add worms, reattach the removable bottom to your Urban Worm Bag. Then take anywhere from a ½ pound at least to 2 pounds at most of these worms and add them directly to your bin. They'll work themselves down into the bedding in no time. Now, worms don't love abrupt changes in their environment, and until they get acclimated, it's possible that many of them will try to escape. You can prevent this by keeping the top open and shining a bright light down into your bag. The worms hate bright light and are going to stay down in the darker bedding. Now, in truth, maintaining an Urban Worm Bag is going to be similar to maintaining any other worm bin, whether it's a plastic stackable system or a simple Rubbermaid bin. The worms really don't care what kind of container they're in. They only care about the conditions of their habitat. They want a microbe-rich and oxygen-rich environment and want to stay in certain ranges when it comes to temperature, moisture, and pH. Let's talk about temperature first. Worms like to stay in temperatures between 55 degrees and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. They can actually tolerate colder temperatures for quite some time, but waste processing and reproduction will slow. But if your vermicompost sees temperatures above 95 degrees for a few hours or more, it could be lights out for your entire population. And we've got YouTube videos and articles on our site that help you keep temperatures in this range. Let's talk about moisture now. The worms are going to love a wet vermicompost, but that wet vermicompost may also cause you problems. One, a very wet material will become anaerobic, meaning starved of oxygen. Your vermicompost should have tiny little pockets of air called pore spaces. When you have a wet vermicompost, water displaces that air in those pore spaces. The microbes consume the available oxygen in the water, but that now anaerobic water will be preventing new air from reoxygenating the pore space. Things that are anaerobic are stinky, so when there are bad smells coming from the worm bin, that means you've got anaerobic conditions. So the worms may love the muck, but this will make for a stinky vermicompost that will be very difficult to harvest. 2. In an Urban Worm Bag, excess moisture pools in the bottom of the vermicompost. Worms are attracted to moisture, so this would attract the worms lower. Since the Urban Worm Bag is harvested from the bottom, having lots of worms in your harvest defeats the point of having an Urban Worm Bag in the first place. You're going to want to keep your moisture around 70% moisture or less. You don't need fancy equipment, you can just use your hands. Vermicompost with moisture around 70% will ball up in your hand when squeezed, and when you squeeze it real hard, a drop or two of moisture should come out between your knuckles. pH is less of a concern, as your vermicompost should be neutral to slightly acidic, and most food wastes tend to be acidic. You can keep pH in line with a light sprinkling of agricultural lime from time to time, but to be honest, the best way to keep both pH and moisture in check is to make sure to add 2 parts bedding to 1 part food waste whenever you feed, and this is by volume. Most new vermicomposters don't realize that worm bedding is unique and that the worms eat their bedding. Most animals don't eat their bedding, and it's something that needs to be changed out from time to time. Not so with worms. They eat organic matter, and bedding is an organic matter. So in other words, bedding is food that breaks down slowly, unlike food waste, which breaks down quickly. And when that food waste breaks down quickly, it releases a surprising amount of water. Most fruit and vegetable wastes are more than 85% water, which is way higher than you want your vermicompost to be, which is, if you remember, about 70%. So you'll need dry bedding to sop up the water released from your food waste as it breaks down. I like to mix the food waste and bedding together, which helps it absorb the moisture. And your bedding is likely to be more alkaline than your acidic food waste, which will keep your pH in check. Now, not all food waste is equal, and not all bedding is equal. Food waste has varying levels of water content, and certain beddings will absorb more water than others. So use that 2-to-1 ratio I just talked about as a rule of thumb, and not a hard and fast rule. In fact, I think it's fun every now and then to put only strips of watermelon or cantaloupe in the bin just to see the worms go crazy for a few days. But then I get back to mixing my food waste with bedding as usual. The most common questions with maintaining an urban worm bag deal with feeding, specifically how much to feed and how frequently. In the beginning, your worm bin will not process waste very quickly. Your microbe and worm populations really haven't started ramping up yet. Your first feedings may be just a cup of food waste and 2 cups of bedding each week. Eventually, you'll be able to add this amount, maybe daily, and eventually the urban worm bag should be able to take about 1 pound of food waste and bedding per day. Let's go back to moisture for a second. We're just about to launch the urban worm bag weather cover, which will allow you to keep your worm bin outdoors. The urban worm bag should be kept indoors whenever possible, but sometimes people just have to have them outside, and they often can't protect them from the rain. Not anymore. Our weather covers are made from a tent-like fabric and will keep your worm bin protected from rain. There are too many questions on worm bin maintenance to answer in this video, but I can tell you that 90% of the problems in a worm bin, from bad smells to fruit flies or even worse conditions like protein poisoning, come from either overfeeding or adding only food waste without adding bedding. And I'm sure you're going to have more questions than what I can answer in this video, so please check out the rest of our videos in this channel. Finally, stay patient and good things will happen with your urban worm bag, and you'll be ready for your first harvest in a few short months. We'll get to harvesting on the next video.